income inequality. We have to think of the attacks against our community by police, because when we talk about how many people are killed by police, in many communities, we know that there have been more Latinos killed than actually our African American brothers and sisters, okay? So how many of our people are incarcerated in prisons? How many of them are homeless? How many of them don't have a decent home to live in? And immigration that we have been, fighting and marching and trying to get for so many decades now, immigration reform. So all of these things are the things that we need to achieve and that we need to work for. Well, now we have our chance. But the way we built the country and the way we have to save the country, we have to do this now. We're not going to have another opportunity for many, many years. So that means that we have to make sure that we get every single person that we know. We cannot leave any stone unturned. We have got to go out there and we've got to register voters and we've got to get out the vote the best way that we can. And I know that this is difficult because we're doing all of this virtually. But just to show you the challenges that we have, I want to give you one example of one of the hardest issues that has come up for us. Because the fear and the terror that our community is experiencing right now is going to kind of paralyze them. It's going to not really motivate them to get involved in this coming election. And we have to cut through that fear every which way that we can. And the best example of that fear is the census. We have been really working very hard to get people to participate in the census. And we tell them, look, when you participate in the census, you are bringing in thousands of dollars into your community. Every family that participates in the census, they get over $1,000 for each member of their family that they list on the census formula. They get that money back into their community and for their family. And even with that, we know many, many people are still reluctant. So when we think of that terror that exists there, then we have to think, is this going to affect the election? We, the Latinos right now, we are the majority minority population. What does that mean? That means that we will be the deciders of so many elections. And yes, we think of the Southwest and we think of California, we think of Arizona, New Mexico, and yes, Texans out there. But then think of other states too. Think of North Carolina, think of Georgia, think of New York State. So these are all states that have a large majority, not a large majority, but a large number of Latinos. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of Latinos. In the state of Virginia, when Terry McAuliffe was elected as the governor of the state of Virginia, guess who won that election for him? It was the Latino community. Latinos are only 8% of the population. See the power that we have, the numbers that we have, but we have to, again, cut through the fear. We've got to go out there. We've got to be able to motivate our people every which way that we can and say to them, ahora es cuando. Now is the time. Ya basta. Enough. We have had enough of the attacks on our community, and now it is time for venganza. It is time for us to get our revenge. And what does that revenge look like? It's called the ballot. The ballot, our non-violent weapon that we are going to use to say, stop the attacks on our community. We demand equity. We want schools that educate our children on an equitable basis. We want to have the same kind of salaries that other people have. We're tired of the discrimination, and we now have somebody running for the presidency that is going to deliver that for us. And also immigration reform. And we know who that is. That's Jose Biden, Pepe Biden, otherwise known as Vice President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, okay? So we got the head of our team. Now we just have to go in there and we have to deliver the vote. And I want to say to all of you, because we all know the phrase, but we know now we have to put it into action. And that phrase is, sí se puede, con los latinos ganamos. Contamos, ganamos. Y si no, votamos. Si no nos contamos, nos fregamos. Okay? Remember that. So it's up to us now. We have to go out there and do the work. And I know we have the troops that can do it. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. And let's keep going. Gracias.
It's important to send a message out to our community that they need to be present, that they need to show up in November. injustices we can't let go.
We need people of color to be at those decision-making tables. Latinos need to be at the table because when we have decisions being made that impact our Latino communities, we should be there to push back and fight back.
I'm a fellow with the Nevada State Democratic Party, so I'm doing voter registration, canvassing, phone banking, making sure we have people helping out the community, turning Nevada blue.
I am an organizer here in Austin. I want to empower my community and win the representation that we deserve.
I didn't grow up seeing many women in leadership, and I was told that women were supposed to be home with their kids, and working wasn't something that a woman should do. So I think it's important for me to do this and to give this away to not only my daughters, but to young women everywhere. We need to really prove how badass we are.
Well, everyone, Cynthia here. I'm a proud Latina, born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I serve as the Latina Political Director at the Democratic National Committee and a community organizer with Mujeres Mobilize. Welcome to our fireside chat, The Power of the Latina Vote. A record 32 million Latinos 2020, and Latinas are leading the pack and the key to creating positive change because our future is on the ballot. At a time in our country when the Latino community is often used as a political wedge issue, it's critical that we tell our own stories and push back on the falsehoods and fear tactics that attempt to paint us as invaders. Latinas are often the leaders and influencers of our families and a vital part of the organizing strategy to expand this electorate. Hashtag Latina Power. I am thrilled to introduce my longtime friend, the host of her own talk show, Maria on El Rey Network, Maria Cardona.
Cynthia, I am so thrilled to be here today, and I'm so honored to be able to host this conversation with three amazing Latinas. Candace Valenzuela, who is a candidate for Texas's 24th district. Cristela Alonso, who is a comedian, actress, producer, activist, you name it, she does it. And my dear friend, Mayra Macias, the executive director of the Latino Victory Project. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. And one of the things I am thrilled about, Cynthia, I don't know if you planned this, but all of these three amazing ladies have been guests of mine on the Maria Show. So that is just something that is so thrilling to me. And frankly, the thing that we have focused on, the theme that we focused on throughout our conversations on the Maria Show was exactly this, that our voice is our vote, and it is the way that we are going to be able to show our power this election. Latinas are going to have an outsized role in this election, but we have to demonstrate it. We have to show it by showing up at the polls. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our amazing panelists because I really want them to share with you all why they are doing everything that they can to ensure that every Latina out there goes out to vote, why they believe that Latinas do have this outsized power. We are heads of families. We are influencers, probably the most amazing and important influencers for our children. And so everything we say and do is an example for them, and it is an example for everyone in our communities. And so, as Cynthia said, we're 32 million eligible voters in November. More than half of that will be Latinas. And so I think that once we focus on underscoring how important the Latina vote is, and that is everywhere, amigos, not just in all 50 states and the 7 territories, but in the capital of the United States, where I'm from, Washington, D.C., where I live, but also in the critical battleground states. I know Matt Barreto is going to get into this later on, so I won't steal his thunder, but we are everywhere, and our influence is important in every single district. So speaking of districts, I want to do the first question, take it over to Candace Valenzuela. Candace, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about the conversations that you are having in your district in terms of making sure that people understand how important their vote is, not just to help get you elected, which we absolutely need to do, but to make sure that we change the leadership at the White House so that the Latino community can finally get the respect it deserves, the seat at the table it deserves, and the voice that we know we can have.
That for a lot of voters, starting with 2018 and going into 2020, there's a lot of renewed hope for the type of representation that is absolutely representative of the full fabric of the American experience. And that fabric is diverse, and it's woven up of many different folks, folks who've come here recently, folks who've been here for generations, folks whose border maybe crossed over their family a couple of times. And that is definitely the experience of many of the families I grew up with, many of the families here in Texas. And I think what's exciting is that right now, we're finally seeing a lot of firsts become seconds and thirds and fourths, and that's where we need to be. It's great to break through in a lot of ways. I'll be the first Black Latina ever elected to United States Congress, but I'm very thankful that I'll be the third Tejana, and I have two incredible examples to follow. They're going to be difficult to follow, but I'm glad that there's leadership to look to when we're trying to lead this state into a better world.
Cristela, I want to bring you in next. You are doing the Hollywood thing, and you have broken barriers on your own. It hasn't been easy, but you are there and you are doing it. You're also an activist. Tell us why you feel strongly as somebody who is in Hollywood, and you could go and do the glamour thing if you chose to, but you are getting your hands involved. You're rolling up your sleeves. You're doing the activism thing. Why is this important to you?
First of all, I got to say, I really love being part of this group right now. I think it's, I'm a first generation Mexican American. I grew up in a border town in South Texas. I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley as well. And I never in my life as a kid thought I would ever get to be part of any kind of DNC programming. And that's actually why I do the work that I do, because I never thought I could be part of it. And in a democracy, it should be our right. Mm-hmm. It should be our required right that we're here. For me also, I think that especially it's hard to make people understand that they're special sometimes and that their voice matters. I am first generation, grew up in a border town, in a mixed status family, to a woman who came here from Mexico with a second grade education, couldn't speak English, in her village had no running electricity or water, and basically women were submissive. So she didn't want that for her kids. She moved here so that they could thrive. And by that, I literally mean having the electricity and water and have her daughters have choices. But the thing is that women like my mom herself never thought her story was special because she always thought, well, if I could do it, no. For far too long, we have minimized what we are capable of doing, and we never show the power of it. I think that's one of the reasons why I've been able to have the opportunities I've had in Hollywood, right? Because in Hollywood, I'm special in the room because in certain rooms, I'm the first one that's ever been there. But really, our stories are so powerful and common. We actually need to get to the point where we realize, hey, what I did was great. What my grandmother, my mother did, that was fantastic. And because of them, I am going to be active in the community and make sure that other people that grew up like me, like them, have the opportunity to have their voices heard. That's why I do it. I do it because I want to thank this country for the possibility that I've had that my mom could have never imagined, but also because I don't want to be the first. I mean, it's Candace said it beautifully. It's like, it's time for the seconds, the thirds. Yeah. When, end of the day, I want to look back and realize that it's so common that we've been able to do it. And common is special because what's normal to you isn't normal to everyone else.
Cristela, well, I hope you continue to do this because your voice is incredibly important. Mayra, Cristela talked about the stories that everyone needs to know. You at Latino Victory are focused on helping more Latinas get elected by telling their stories, which are quintessential American stories. What are you guys finding throughout your conversations across the country as you try to recruit more Latinas to run, as you mobilize people to vote for them?
Well, I just want to echo what Cristela said and say that I am humbled to share the virtual stage with trailblazers in politics and media, in government. It is phenomenal to have the opportunity to share their stories. And before I delve into the stories that we're hearing, I want to talk about why it matters. And I know that all of us are committed to electing Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris because we need this man out of office. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, you know, those ambassadors, the first people that talk to our community isn't going to be the presidential campaign. Right. It's going to be your local city council candidate, your local school board candidate, your local legislative or congressional candidate. And the reason why this matters, and Cristela and Candace talk about this all the time, right, is because you cannot be what you do not see. Mm-hmm. And I want to share a quick little anecdote in the spirit of storytelling. My sister lives in New Mexico. She's in Albuquerque. My sister was not political. She only votes because she says it keeps me employed. We're first generation. My parents both immigrated from Mexico, grew up in Chicago, very political city, you know, didn't think that I would end up in politics. Mm-hmm. But in 2018, we had a candidate running for Congress by the name of Xochitl Torres-Small. Xochitl was running to be the first Latina to represent New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. And on election night, Xochitl was declared as losing her election. She was down 2,000 votes. Headlines on the paper said she had lost. And we were devastated. Xochitl is in her 30s. She's an attorney. She fights for water rights. She used to work at Planned Parenthood, embodies progressive values. Mm-hmm. The next day I had to do a postmortem. So I get on a plane and my phone was off. As soon as I land, my phone starts buzzing and I realize my sister's been texting me. My sister, as I mentioned, lives in Albuquerque. She's at the University of New Mexico. She's a scientist. Again, only involved in politics to make sure I have a job. And she sends me a text and she says, I'm crying. Xochitl won. So while I was on the plane,
wow,
ballots had 8,000 ballots had come in a part of the New Mexico that hadn't been counted the night before. And Xochitl went from being down 2,000 votes to up 3,000, made history, and is now a member of Congress. Reason why, exactly, the reason why that matters is because ever since then, my sister has kept track of the local elected officials. She's kept track of what Xochitl does, and she's involved. Yeah. Right. And the reason why folks like Candace matter is because, again, they are the people that are opening the door for so many of us who never felt seen or represented in this government, who never felt seen or represented in this process. And they're allowing us to be engaged. They're the entry points of engagement. But the reason we stay is because we realize that we have the power to make the difference. As you said at the beginning, 32 million strong. The path to the White House will run through the Latino vote, and the path to the Latino vote is through Latinas. And I want to close out with some really stark numbers. You know, Latinos make up 18% of the population, but only 1% of elected officials. Of that 1%, less than 40% are Latinas. And that is unacceptable. Candace said we didn't have Latinas in Congress from Texas until 2018. Both Sylvia Garcia and Veronica Escobar, Latino Victory candidates that were part of this program called Year of the Latina. Again, 2018, we realized that we needed to make a deliberate commitment to support more Latina candidates. So of the 58 candidates we supported in 2018, which is the most we've ever supported, 60% were Latinas. Of the 58 that we endorsed, 43 won. Of those 43 that won, 68% of those wins were Latinas. So not only is it important to have Latinas because they help bring in more Latinas through the door, help get them engaged, but they win. And so this cycle, we have a program called First Latinas, which Candace is a part of, because again, in 2020, we're still breaking glass ceilings. As Candace said, she'd be the first Afro-Latina, but we also have local candidates and legislatures who'd be running to be the first Latinas in their state. Just yesterday, we had elections in Florida. Amy Mercado, a Puerto Rican in Central Florida, made history by becoming the first Latina and first woman of color elected to the Orange County Property Appraiser's Office, a county-wide office that is making sure that our community feels seen and represented in the heart of Florida's Puerto Rican community. And so I say this because we're all here to make sure that we get Donald Trump out of the White House. And there are many paths to do that, but we cannot forget about supporting these Latina candidates who are opening the door for so many of us to feel seen, to feel represented, and making sure that we don't just vote in 2020, that we stay involved and we're pushing our elected officials to be accountable to our community. And only then will we realize the power of our voice.
Mayra, I couldn't agree with you more because, like you said, these Latinas are the ambassadors to, for example, and for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, right? They're going to be the ones, they're going to be talking to the extended Latino family across the country because let's face it, and I want to go to Candace for this question. Not everybody knows Joe Biden the way that I do or Cynthia does or people who've been involved in politics forever do. Not everybody knows Kamala Harris the way you do, Mayra, the way you might, Cristela, because they just don't have those connections and haven't been involved in politics for so many years. So as a result, they need people, especially in the Latino community. We know that we make connections and we make those connections through confianza, through people that we trust. Yep. And so Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have to have those voceros for them within the community. And they are people like you, Candace. So talk to us a little bit about what you hear on a day-to-day basis in terms of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and what you're doing to spread the word that they are going to be the best champions of the Latino community in the White House.
What I'm hearing is a lot of excitement that we have a pathway forward, that we're going to be able to not just push out the orange menace, but we're going to have a renewed sense of hope for this country. And I'm really excited about that. I'm also really excited just seeing slates across the country that look like America. In my particular slate going up ballot, I'm going to bring in a lot of the same voters as MJ Hagar, but we're going to have different votes. And MJ and I are going to have different votes from Kamala and Joe. And that is one of the most exciting things. When people talk about how are we going to take this vote out? How are we going to get that vote? How are we going to get these people to the polls? We do that through representation. Mm-hmm. And as our slates look more and more like the people of this country, we're going to have more participation. And that is just the best.
That is everything. That's exactly right. Cristela, what do you hope to hear tonight from Kamala Harris and then tomorrow night from Joe Biden that will continue to give you the excitement that we need to move forward?
You know, I think that two things that we should be looking out for, and everybody has mentioned it before, it's the inclusivity, right? And it comes down to, I know personally, the Latino community, a lot of the people that I talk to, we always constantly talk about how we seem to have won the face of immigration. Therefore, it seems as if the only issue that we are concerned about is immigration. I think that if we could actually have conversations where we're included and really have people in this country listen and be reminded that Latinos are also concerned about education, the Disabilities Act, we are everywhere. So I think that in order to actually just make sure that, if there is talk about immigration, we talk about other countries that aside from the Latino community that have immigrants that are in this country, because when you actually realize, when you talk and speak to everybody and say, we hear all of you, there's more confidence in knowing that you will make that right choice in voting for these candidates. Look, there's something beautiful. there's something beautiful about Kamala, getting nominated for the VP, getting the VP nomination.
Absolutely.
It's the same goosebumps I got with Obama. It's that thing where never in my life did I think that was a possibility, and it's this thing that when you see it, you want to do everything to protect it and make sure that it triumphs. But also I want people to know, I want to hear that they're also open to learning. And that's one thing. It's like, nobody expects the candidates to be perfect. I always say we're voting for a politician. We're not voting for saint. And even, as a Catholic, saints, we became some people became saints doing some magic tricks. All right. So, it's this thing where we're not voting for saints. We're voting for politicians. So if there is an issue that maybe some of the community doesn't agree with or align with completely, I want them to know that they need to state that they're willing to work with us to make sure that we make progress. We can't fix problems that have taken decades, but we can move the needle a little bit closer if we're willing to listen to the people they're representing, which is all of us, including the 32 million Latinos.
Well, that's a great segue to talk about the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris Latino agenda. Mayra, I'm sure you have seen it, but it essentially does what Cristela says. Yes, it talks about immigration. It talks about it in a holistic manner, that we have to make sure to fix our immigration system, that we have to bring in civility and humanity, especially in the face of such hatred and vitriol that frankly has cost Latinos their lives, as we saw in the tragic shooting in El Paso a year ago. But what we have also seen from this agenda is that they do focus on the economics of it. They focus on investing in Latino businesses. They focus on healthcare, where healthcare in the face of a global pandemic where we have just crossed the horrific threshold of 171,000 American deaths, disproportionately tens of thousands of those are Latinos because of the disparities that exist in the health system. I think that this is an agenda that we can sell. What do you think, Mayra?
Well, I love what Cristela said about making progress, right? Because we also have to be transparent with voters. Right. And one of the things that I loved about the plan is, and I think this is a result of the moment we're in, right? As you pointed out, COVID has disproportionately affected Latinos, but it's also shed a light on how our institutions have been historically and deliberately failing communities of color. Right. And it's forcing our elected officials to grapple with that in a way that wasn't the case before. And what I loved about the plan is that not only was it presenting policy positions to take us forward, but acknowledging that there are systemic and racially motivated issues that hinder, the ability for certain institutions to really service our communities. So they take a deeper look than just saying, here is how we fix it in the short term. It was an acknowledgement that the way it was built has to be completely reimagined, whether it's our education system, whether it's the healthcare system. Latinos still have the highest rate of uninsurance. And so that I felt like it was a nod to all of the candidates that were running at the beginning of this cycle that kept pivoting, like Julian, that kept pivoting back to the roots of these issues. And the one other piece that I thought was really important that we don't talk about enough is small business protection and support. Mm-hmm. I'm sure everybody on this panel has a family member that owns a bodega or a taqueria or a little small business that is employing so many individuals. And in this time of COVID, these are the businesses that have been hit the hardest, that often don't have the resources to get these loans that some of the multi-million-dollar companies have access to. And so acknowledging, as Cristela said, that yes, we care about immigration, but we're also the largest growing community of entrepreneurs. We also, again, suffer disproportionately from inadequate healthcare. We also have 1 in 4 children that are part of the public school system from K to 12 are Latinos. And so we care about education. That acknowledgement was very important to me. And I appreciate that everything was just in one place for folks who don't know Joe or who don't know Senator Harris to be able to look at and see this is where they stand on Latino issues.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the things that we should all be very excited about is that, you know, as we've all acknowledged, Kamala Harris tonight will make history. She will be the first woman of color on a presidential ticket. The daughter of immigrants twice over is what I'm so excited about. She understands the immigrant experience. She has worked for the Latino community in California as a senator, as an attorney general. She understands what our community goes through. And so we need to help tell her story, right, between now and the election. And so what I want to do now with the three of you is do another round robin, but we're going to take you to the day after the election. Candace, what are the headlines that you want to see both for your race as well as for the presidency? And what is the sub-headline in terms of the Latino vote for you?
Well, I want to see that we are, Democrats get to work saving families. Democrats get to work saving our small businesses right away. We need to hit the ground running as soon as possible. I want to see that we've had record turnout for our country's Latino communities as well. And that's going to do a lot. That's going to have a lot to do with the work that we put in as people running for office and reaching out to the communities. And I say this as a Latina. It's not enough just to be Latina. I have to actually have conversations with folks. They're not all going to be easy. We're not uniform. The Latino community, the Asian American community, we don't exist in monoliths. Right. And so if we're not having that open dialogue, we're not going to get the turnout that we're going to need in order to not just get folks into office, but to really turn this country around. Mm-hmm. And I am excited that there are so many people that are leaving their silos, that are leaving their, this is my group, this is my lane, and going, it's time to work together. It's time to save this country.
I love that. Cristela, same for you, except you are handed a script. They want you to be the lead. What is the theme of the movie about this election and the role that Latinos played?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think that I would want the story to be about the movement of Latinos voting, starting grassroots. Because I think that working in the community, I see so many organizers and activists that get constantly overlooked. Mm-hmm. And their hard work and their efforts and everything, I want to champion it. I want to celebrate it. And I want to show how it can be a story about a Latino nonprofit organization that created public transit that can take voters from rural areas to the.
Oh, I love that.
It's just we think about that and we don't think about like the specific efforts. That's the kind of movie I would love to do.
And to be fair, I would want to throw in there that I would love for Cristela not to be handed the script. I'd love for her to write it.
There you go. They will give her creative control. How about
Please.
That?
Okay.
The seat is there.
Mayra, now for you get to take a look at the landscape, and so many young Latinas have stepped up and called you to say, I want to run for office. Tell us the scheme of what you're seeing. How many Latinas want to run, and what do they want to run for, and what is the plan for Latino victory?
So my headline, in addition, everyone has already said we take back the White House, but because I'm with two Tejanas, my headline would be Democrats flip the Texas House.
Yes.
Flipping red to blue.
Yes.
Because to your question, Maria, we have so many Latinas that are running in red to blue districts where we are less than 10 seats away from flipping chambers. And in Texas, we're 9 seats away from flipping the House. 4 Latinas are running in those 9 seats that are needed. and they would be the first Latinas to represent those districts. So in addition to all these first Latinas that we have running for Congress, so the first LGBTQ Latina ever elected, first Afro-Latina, first Latina from Kansas, first Latina from Indiana, I would want to see us flip these legislative chambers that are going to be key to redistricting in the future for our next decade.
Oh, I love that. Beautiful. Ladies, we are out of time, but I hope that everything that you all just said in your last round is the reality on November 4th. And so I know that everything that you guys are doing will move towards that. So everyone who is watching, keep your eye on these ladies. Listen to them. Your voice is your vote. I want to thank Chairman Tom Perez. I want to thank Hispanic Caucus Chair Iris Martinez and Cynthia and everyone at the DNC for putting this together and for frankly showing the country in these last 2 days and then tonight and tomorrow night the incredibly diverse beauty of the coalition, not just of Democrats, but of Americans who want civility and humanity back in the White House. So, para adelante, everyone. Our voice is our vote. Thank you so much for joining us.
History is not a fairy tale. The battle for this soul of the nation has been a constant push and pull between the American ideal that says we're all created equal and the harsh reality that racism has long torn us apart. The words the president utters matter. How far is from Trump saying this is an invasion to the shooter in El Paso declaring this attack is a response to Hispanic invasion of Texas? We're living through a rare moment in this nation's history where our president lacks the moral authority to lead. We'll have to do what our president can't. Stand together, stand against hate, leaving nobody behind, demonizing no one, not the poor, the powerless, the immigrant, or the other. It's a uniquely American code. It's who we are.
Hey everyone, how are we doing? I hope everyone's having a great convention so far. Obviously, joining everybody virtually is different, having been a delegate before, but it's really reaching a lot of people all across the country. So it's great to be here at the caucus. Thanks for having me. Proud to have been part of the keynote last night with amazing Americans from across the country. And I wanted to share a little bit about why it's important for us as Latinos, as a Latinx community, to support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and really talk about some of the issues that are really critical to us in the future. I had the chance obviously from California to get to know the campaign that when both Kamala and Joe ran for president. We went to Iowa, went to Nevada, and they both ran amazing campaigns. And now we have them both on one ticket, which of course is historic. And tonight we of course get to nominate Kamala Harris for vice president. So we're really thrilled and excited about that. Wanted to share a few things. I think one thing that is important to the campaign for the Biden team, and I think they've been talking about this, is there is a focus on racial justice and on equity. We know that first, who powered Vice President Biden's campaign? We know that particularly Black women and our brothers and sisters within that community did incredible work to support someone who has always been there on those issues. He, of course, served President Obama as an amazing vice president, and together they put in place the most progressive platform and administration on issues of equity. You think about the work that happened in the Department of Justice, you think about the work and the appointments that happened to the federal bench, what they set as far as working with the states. It's really a record that we can be proud of. And working now with Kamala Harris, they are moving forward on issues around equity, on reform of law enforcement across the country, making sure that appointments reflect the diversity of our country, which we can expect come this November. And those are all issues that we can be proud of. We are in a movement right now around Black Lives Matter. It's important for us como Latinos, as members of the Latinx community, to support that movement. I think that solidarity is really important and it's critical. that we understand that Black Lives Matter to all of us. Black Lives Matter to Latinos. And I think that's something that's really important as a show of strength and as a show of unity. I want to add that as a community, we also know that racial injustice affects us as well. And both Kamala and Joe understand that. Something a lot of people don't know is that when Kamala Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate just a few years ago, her very first appearance and visit the day after she won, it was a day or two after she won, was coming to LA and visiting with Dreamers at an organization called Chirla. And for those from California, across the country, you know that Chirla is one of the largest immigration organizations, advocacy civil rights organizations in the country. And her first decision was to stand in front of Dreamers and undocumented folks and tell them that she's going to have their back. She brought the press there. She met with Dreamers. She amplified their voices. And that's exactly who she is. That's why our community loves her, because she represents us and is one of us. And as an immigrant myself, I stood with her at that event. I saw the way she stood up to Donald Trump, who had also just been elected. And she's continued to do so in her role in the U.S. Senate. Time and time again, she has stood with the Latinx community, and we couldn't be more proud of her, like Latinos. And I think that includes all of us across the country. I want to add that we're living in this COVID-19 era and pandemic. We know that this disease is affecting our community harder than anybody else. You know, there's a new report today just in the LA Times. There's been others in other publications across the country. We need Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to put and understand that as a community, como Latinos, we have also different needs. And to have people in place that are going to understand our culture, our community, and put an equity lens on the work that is happening in the White House is critically important. We know that issues that matter to us are not just about racial equity. They're not just about healthcare. They're not just about immigration, but that was mentioned earlier. They're also on issues of education and the workplace and labor standards. So we have a lot to look forward to with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Tonight is Kamala's night, and as a Californian, I could not be happier. But tomorrow night, we are going to be able to hear, of course, from the next president of the United States, someone who has always stood up for Latinos across this country. I'm part of Joe Biden's national Latino group, so his leadership group, and we're working hard to get everybody engaged. So I would encourage you, many of your states have Latino groups and committees. We have a national group. Please engage with the party, engage with the DNC. We want to get Latinos involved from across the country and do everything we can to get Joe Biden elected. We are going to make the difference. And particularly look at some of these swing and critical states. We are going to make the difference. And so I just want to thank you all for having me. I want to thank you for all the work that we're doing. This virtual convention, while different, is reaching a lot of people across the country. So muchas gracias. Por favor, ten un día muy bueno hoy día. Y hoy día vamos a ver a Kamala Harris para que sea el vicepresidente. So, gracias.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this panel to discuss the importance of the Latino vote. My name is Matt Barreto from Latino Decisions, and I'm joined today by two very exciting and well-known leaders and champions in our community, Tom Perez and Nelly Gorbea. I'm going to introduce them here in just a second. But what are we going to talk about today? I'm so excited to be here and talk about part of the DNC Hispanic Caucus, a little bit about the voting process, what's happening this year, and what we all need to do to make sure that we have a powerful Latino vote this cycle. Voting is changing across our country more than ever before. We are seeing states rush to increase absentee ballots and vote by mail. And by the way, regardless of what the president says, they are the same thing. If the president can vote by mail, we can all vote by mail. States are changing their in-person voting sites. They're changing how voting works so we can all stay safe and healthy. But some states are standing in the way. Some states are blocking our access. They're closing polling locations. They're limiting vote by mail. And they're trying to take away ballot boxes and drop boxes to slow the delivery of the U.S. mail. To get started, I'd like to welcome Chairman Tom Perez. And he needs no introduction, but I'll do my best to give a short overview of his amazing leadership. As is well known, Tom is the son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. He grew up in Buffalo, where he says he learned the values of a union town, hard work, integrity, and service. After putting himself through college with Pell Grants and working on the back of a garbage truck, Tom turned down offers at big-time law firms, and instead he went to go work for the U.S. Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division. He worked for 8 years in the Obama administration, first as the head of the Civil Rights Division, and then later, of course, as the Secretary of Labor. And now we've been so fortunate to have him overseeing our great party as chairman of the DNC. In addition to Tom, we're going to be joined today by Nelly Gorbea. Nelly Gorbea is the Secretary of State of the state of Rhode Island. She is in her second term. She was elected first in 2014. Secretary Gorbea became the first Hispanic statewide elected official in New England, in all of New England, imagine that. And as Secretary of State, she has promoted increased civic engagement and government accessibility. This work builds on her lifelong work as a community leader in Rhode Island. She's originally from Puerto Rico. Secretary Gorbea is a graduate of Princeton, has a master's in public administration from Columbia University, and she oversaw one of the most progressive expansions with the automatic voter registration system in her state of Rhode Island. But let me start first, Chairman Perez, with you and ask you if you could, and it's going to be a hard question, but to be summarized for us in just 60 seconds, un minuto if you can, what is at stake for the Latino community in 2020? Why should we make sure that every hermano or primo or tia gets out to vote this year?
Our democracy is at stake, Matt. Our lives are at stake. Look at the pandemic and its disproportionate impact on African American, Latino, Native Americans. Our jobs are at stake. Lady Liberty's on the ballot. If you know a dreamer, the future of dreamers are on the ballot. Everything is on the ballot. And that's why this is an all hands on deck enterprise. That's why we've worked so closely with the Biden campaign to make sure we are investing in Latino engagement, making sure that Latinos know the consequences, they know the stakes. They are not cowed by these intimidation tactics of Trump, and they turn out. Porque cuando votamos, ganamos. Nuestros números son nuestro poder y nuestro voto es nuestra voz.
That's exactly right. There are power in our numbers. There's no doubt about it. We're going to come back a little bit later to talk about a state I know you've been paying a lot of attention to, Texas, and what's changing there. But let me go to Secretary Gorbea. As Secretary of State and someone who has been a longtime organizer of civic engagement in the Latino community, what are you doing? And what can those who are watching this panel do to help get out the Latino vote this year?
Well, I am communicating, and then also watching carefully that we safeguard our voting rights. So here, I ran for Secretary of State because I wanted to make government work for people. The only way that government will work for people is if people take action and vote. So nuestra voz es nuestro voto. Tenemos que salir a votar, absolutamente. Y lo que dice Chairman Perez is absolutely correct. Much of what I do is communicate the information that I have the privilege to have. People who are watching this have a lot of information about elections. We need to then convey that to our primos, nuestros tíos, nuestros abuelos for the next several weeks. That's all we should be talking about. to the point where, they may not want to talk to us anymore. But we have to convey, how do I vote? How are you doing this? Where are we going to go? Because that is the way that we can make an impact on this election cycle, by going out and voting. So the good news is that a well-known firm, Latino Decisions, actually did a poll recently saying that 74% of Latinos are actually following the news about this presidential election closely. And it also shows that we care about the same things that other Americans care about: the COVID response, healthcare, good jobs. So, we are tuned in to this election, but we need to make sure that now that we have all these options, voting from home, early in person, or voting on election day, our community, nuestra familia, sabe cómo ejercitar ese derecho al voto. That our families, that our neighbors know how to exercise that important right to vote. So a lot of what I'm doing is just talking with people, encouraging others to talk.
That's great. And I hope that everyone listening does get their families involved and does get everyone to get out the vote. We're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of what Rhode Island is doing and other progressive states who are expanding the right to vote and trying to make it easier. But let me shift back to you, Tom. There's been so much news about what's happening with vote by mail. There's an increase in interest. Everybody is asking, how can I do this? What is the law in my state? At the same time, many people prefer to vote in person. So we want to keep both of those options safe and available. But now we're hearing about the potential post office slowdowns. What is our message to our gente about how to vote? Voting early, voting by mail, voting in person. And what are we doing as a party to make sure that they have that information and that they can vote securely in this election?
That's a really important set of questions. I'm not sure I can answer that in 60 seconds because there's so many important things to say about that.
Take your time.
Point number one, Matt, is that voters should have options. If you want to vote in person, you should have the right to do that. And for many people, it's actually almost a cultural experience. And so we need to make sure that polling locations are open. We need to make sure that we have the requisite number of poll workers so that these polls will indeed remain open. Number two, make a plan. Make a plan. And the plan should start with going to iwillvote.com. Make a plan early. iwillvote.com. Regardless of where you live, if you live in Alaska or if you live in Warwick, Rhode Island, you go to that, you type in your name, you type in your zip code, and it will tell you your registration status. If your first language is Spanish, then go to voyavotar.com. And all of this information is available in Spanish. Really important to make a plan and make it early. Election day is nominally November 3rd, but what I like to say is Election day ends November 3rd. And for so many others, you can vote early. We are saying, I talk about options. Again, we need to make sure people can vote in person. We need to maximize the number of early voting days for people who want to vote early in person. If you have 15, 20 days in a state, then you can minimize the issues of long lines, and you can maximize the issues and the imperatives of social distancing. And then again, in the vote by mail context, making sure that people have that option. And I want to give a special shout out to Nellie and to Rhode Island. They just completed successful legal action that has resulted in expanding, making it easier for people who want to vote absentee to do that. That was a really remarkable development. The Supreme Court just gave it the final green light last week, and I'm really excited about that. We are involved. We weren't involved in that case. We've been involved in so many other cases, Matt, because we must use litigation. We must use organizing. We must use this public education. And we're also working with many local authorities across the country to make sure they have the resources so that they can implement absentee ballot programs, vote by mail programs, because here's the challenge. If you're used to getting X number of absentee voter requests and now you're getting 10X, you need to build capacity to deal with 10X. And that is a real challenge. And when you have a president who's demonizing and attempting to undermine vote by mail and threatening to undermine the capacity of the Postal Service to do that, that creates another unconscionable set of challenges. And that is why we are using every tool in our toolbox. Again, we filed lawsuits. Others have filed lawsuits across the country to protect the right to vote by mail. We are in Wisconsin in April of this year. There was a primary election. And on that same day, there was a really important election for Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin. The other side, the Republicans, shamelessly tried to weaponize the pandemic. They wanted to depress turnout so that they could steal that seat. Well, guess what? We filed litigation. Our litigation enabled 90,000 people whose votes would have otherwise been not counted to exercise their right to vote. We out-hustled them by organizing. We were reaching out to voters virtually to show them how to vote absentee. We ended up winning that race. And those races in Wisconsin are won and lost by about 10, 15,000 votes. We won by 140,000 votes because we out-organized them. And we're doing that all across the country. We have a 600,000 vote by mail advantage in Florida right now. We've got an advantage in Arizona. The most important acronym in Arizona is PEVL. What does that mean? The Permanent Early Voting List. You get on that list, you'll get your ballot. We expect and we are working to make sure that no less than 80% of the votes in Arizona are cast before Election Day. That's going to help Joe Biden. That's going to help Mark Kelly. That's going to help Democrats up and down the ticket there. Don't be intimidated by these scare tactics of Donald Trump. Vote by mail is easy. It is safe. There's no difference between vote by mail and absentee voting. I don't know what the heck the president's talking about when he tries to make a distinction there. There is no difference. President Trump, there was a Florida primary yesterday, and guess how he voted down there? He voted by mail. It's easy and it's safe. Make a plan. And we are going to continue our work. We have the most muscular voter protection infrastructure we've ever had with the Biden campaign and the DNC. And in addition, so many players in the ecosystem, Fair Fight, the Redistricting Commission that Eric Holder, my former boss, leads. There's so many players in the ecosystem. We all have our oars in the water. We're rowing in synchrony. We want to make sure every eligible person can cast their vote and that those votes are counted. That's exactly what we're working on. It's impossible to overstate the importance, Matt, of the question you just asked. But what we need is for everybody on this live stream to take responsibility, to make sure you make a plan, and then get 20 or 30 or 40 other people to make a plan, to go to voyavotar.com or iwillvote.com and to make sure you're getting out there. Because, again, Trump wants to intimidate our community. No hay duda. Él quiere que nuestra comunidad tiene miedo de que votar. We cannot allow fear to inhibit us. We need to put hope on the ballot.
That's great, Tom. I love the examples that you gave of the lawsuits as well. That's something we don't always think about, but we need to remember. And you know, just for our friends listening and watching, if you've already perhaps maxed out on your contributions to all of us here at the DNC and elsewhere, the candidates, give some money to MALDEF, give some money to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Committee, the ACLU. There are so many people, as you said, in the ecosystem, and we need to make sure that those lawyers and experts are fighting for our vote. Secretary Gorbea, Nelly, I want to turn back to you. What should every state and county be doing to ensure safe in-person voting? If we can start with that, because I know you have expanded vote by mail, but we're hearing in some places that they're not providing masks or cleaning equipment, and you have touchscreen machines. And how can we make sure that people feel confident when they go to the polls on election day or early that it's going to be a safe experience?
Yeah, no. Well, it's like Chairman Perez just said. You have to plan and review your options. The challenge of American democracy is that every single jurisdiction is different. So if you move from Massachusetts to Rhode Island, you change the way that your election is structured, let alone if you go to a place like Texas or Florida, where there's county governments, which we don't happen to have. So the first and foremost is inform yourself as to what those options. Jurisdictions should be offering, like we do in Rhode Island, 3 different ways of voting. You should be able to vote from home if that's what you need to do, whether it be because you have young children, because you have people in your household that you don't want to expose to the virus. You should have that option to vote safely and securely from home. In many jurisdictions, if you're concerned for some reason about the mail, which has been a topic right now, you should be able to put your ballot in a drop box, an official election drop box. So there's options there with regarding to voting from home. Then today in Rhode Island, we started early in-person voting. For the next 20 days, in many jurisdictions, like in Rhode Island, actually in the case of us, we have a primary September 8th. I just realized a lot of people listening don't have a September 8th primary. We do. So we have 20 days before the election, an early in-person voting time where you can just show up in many cases, just like you would in a polling location, whether you're required a voter ID or not, and vote. And so that's another option. There'll be the idea there being that there may be fewer crowds than on the crush of election day. But what we saw in Rhode Island in the presidential primary was that when we opened the flexibility of voting from home, 83% of our voters voted from home.
Wow.
We had a record turnout. 100,000 Rhode Islanders voted on a presidential primary that pretty much everybody knew what the results were going to be. So you can imagine now for this tsunami of an election, which is going to be the November 3rd election, there's going to be a lot more interest. So jurisdictions need to be preparing, and I know many of them are, to take care of that demand and be able to serve the people, serve the voters with these 3 options. And each person that's listening to this program should find out locally, what are those options and what are the different people around me going to do to exercise their right to vote?
And can you just quickly, you talked about voting from home, it's so important. Can you just quickly dispel for us those myths that we always hear the president, those lies about vote by mail? You have safeguards in place that make sure that the correct person votes the correct ballot, that the signature matches. What was that experience like? And did you encounter any issues of voter fraud, or was it a secure election?
It was a very secure election, Matt. And in fact, when we were doing this case in the Supreme Court, one of the judges asked in the Boston Court of Appeal to the Republican lawyer, asked, well, can you give some example of actual concrete voter fraud? And that question was never answered. The truth of the matter is that there isn't one. Here's a great example. Oregon. Oregon is an entirely vote by mail state. Voters get mailed a ballot to their house and they fill it out and they send it in. Okay. Oregon has mailed out more than 100 million ballots since 2000, with about a dozen cases of proven fraud. So that's a 0.00012% rate. I'm sorry, I'll take those odds, right?
Out of 100 million ballots, you're saying only 12.
Yes.
What are the odds of getting struck by lightning?
It's got to be way higher than that.
El voto por correo es totalmente seguro. Tenemos diferentes formas de asegurarnos de que se cuente ese voto. So, si usted tiene alguna pregunta o alguna preocupación de que no puede ir al lugar de votación, pida un voto por correo, una papeleta ausente.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, a lot of people have those questions, and that is the safest way to vote. Tom, can we talk a little bit about Texas, a state I know you're paying a lot of attention to? Now, this is a state that they're making it harder to vote. We were just celebrating these reforms in Rhode Island and California and elsewhere. In Texas, they said, you have to be over 65 if you want to vote by mail. Everyone under 65 has to go to the polls. They're closing locations. What are you doing? What is the party doing? My understanding is we're expanding our efforts in Texas. We have more staff there than ever before. How are we going to make sure that everyone has the right to vote and that state starts to turn?
Well, let me level set to give all the viewers a sense of how important your question is. Texas is a battleground state, folks. The last 7 polls in the presidential have it a dead heat. Latinos can be the difference maker. I learned from this guy I know. I forgot his organization. I think it's called like Latino Decisions or something like that. I did a panel with this guy named Matt down in Texas after the 2018 election. And what I learned from this guy, Matt, was that 800,000 more Latinos voted in 2018 than in 2014. That's pretty remarkable. Beto lost by a little over 200,000 votes. What I also learned from this guy, Matt, and people say he's pretty smart. I don't know if you know him, Matt. What I also learned was 3.5 million Latinos in Texas were eligible to vote in 2018 and did not vote. Some were registered, some were not. All were eligible to vote. 3.5 million. If you want to know the future in Texas, 3.5 million. And again, Beto lost by 200,000 votes. If 7% of those folks had been voting, we would have Senator O'Rourke in the United States Senate. So again, I wanted to level set the stakes. And the reason I bring that up is because the Republicans know that data. And they also know that they're wrong on all the issues. They're wrong on immigration. They're wrong to be trying to do away with coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. They're wrong to be trying to put a fork in the Affordable Care Act. Latinos have disproportionately benefited from the Affordable Care Act because we were disproportionately among the ranks of the uninsured. And so they continue. Their only strategy is to make it harder for people to vote. And I sued the state of Texas when I ran the Civil Rights Division. They had a voter ID law that, among other things, just to give you an example of its lunacy, your concealed carry permit was a permissible form of ID, but your University of Texas or your Prairie View A&M ID was not a permissible form of ID. Some people had to travel over 130 miles to find a place where they could get the requisite identification, 130 miles. I call that a poll tax. That's the level of suppression that they are undertaking. And now what they're trying to do again is many of these same tactics. Here's why I have a ton of optimism in Texas. And by the way, we need 9 seats in the Texas House of Representatives to win, to flip that house. That's huge. In addition to Joe Biden, in addition to that U.S. Senate seat, we can flip the U.S. House, the state House of Representatives there. That would be huge and game-changing for redistricting. And that is why we've invested so much in organizing. Remember, we were successful in Wisconsin because we out-hustled them with organizing. You have a great party chair in Texas, Gilberto Hinojosa. Litigation, again, is another tool that is being used right now in Texas. And there are early voting. And here's one of the advantages we have that we didn't have as recently as 2018. We won a number of local elections in 2018 that were critically important. And I'll give you just one example very quickly. Harris County, which is Metro Houston. The administrator of elections prior to 2018 was a Republican. She didn't believe that people should be able to vote early. Their early voting hours were worse than bankers' hours. A Democrat won that race. And so now we're going to have legitimate early voting that will enable people to get out there after work, things of that nature. And so those local elected victories in Texas are critical for our success. And we have to keep forging ahead. We need to keep investing. We need to keep communicating with the community. 3.5 million eligible people who didn't vote. And probably the number's closer to 4 million now because we have another 2 years. It's a very young population. Many people turned 18, a lot of in-migration of eligible voters into the state. Folks, this is the present and this is the future. And Matt, that is why we are investing in using every one of these tools in our toolbox, and the entire ecosystem is down there. And I'm proud of my colleague and friend, Maria Teresa Kumar. They do a lot of voter registration in Texas, and they do it digitally with Voto Latino. She's a great partner in this ecosystem. There's an all hands on deck effort in Texas and elsewhere, and that's going to help us flip Texas.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Chairman Perez talking about Texas flipping. And let's also give some credit, to our mutual friend, Albert Morales, who is doing all that research. He's the one feeding me the numbers that I can feed to you, Tom. So a shout out to Albert there. Just as we wrap up, Nelly, I want to give you the final word here, closing out our panel. What is your message here? If we're talking to the people who are tuned in, are probably likely voters. What is the message to the rest of our gente, our familia, our comunidad? What are we telling them to get out the vote, and how and why they should get out the vote this year?
Miren, mi gente, esta elección es como ninguna otra en su vida y tiene el potencial no solamente de cambiar el curso de nuestra historia como nación, sino de nuestras comunidades al punto granular. Es súper importante que su voz sea su voto. To my people, this election is the election of the century, and it is in our own hands, in our community's hands, our well-worked hands, to be able to not just change the course of our country and the world for the better, but to change our communities. Because on that ticket in November 3rd, yes, there's an absolutely critical race at the top of the ticket. But all through that ballot, you will see people who can change and improve conditions for your family, can provide better education, can make sure that you don't have to worry about your health care, that can make sure that your kids, your families have an ability to have jobs that pay living wages. All of that with that act of voting. But it's not enough for you to take care of yourself voting. In this election, you have to bring everybody else with you to go vote. Make a plan, whether it's voting from home, voting early in person, or voting on election day, November 3rd. It cannot be that there is any single person out there that is registered but doesn't go to vote. Así es que, mi gente, esa es la asignación. Particularmente a mi gente boricua that moved from the island. I want to make a special plea as a fellow boricua. You need to be registered and you need to vote. It is not enough to talk about, ay bendito, ¿qué ha pasado con la isla? We have to exercise the right to vote. All of my rest of my colleagues, if we want to make a change, yes, for immigration, for education, for everything else, we absolutely have to make ourselves count. Así que vaya y sea su voz, su voto.
There you have it, folks. Thank you. Let's special thanks both Chairman Perez and Secretary Gorbea. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to be with you. We have only a few days left here, 77 days or however many are counting. Let's get out the vote. Everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your convention, especially tonight, our California Senator and Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. I'm sitting here in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, just north of the New Mexico line. And around me, I see the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the San Juan Mountains, the Rio Grande River. Our roots are deep, and the Latino community, the Latino X community in this election is going to make all the difference in the world. So I am delighted to be part of this team. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. I'm just so proud to be walking this journey with all of you and with Joe Biden and with Kamala Harris. And to the DNC, Latino Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, I just want to say thank you to Senator Martinez from Illinois, who does such a wonderful job organizing this, and to our chairman, Tom Perez, the first Latino chair in the history of the United States of a major party, to people like Cynthia and so many of the people who are making this convention a very historic one. It doesn't have to be said again, but I would just echo it. This is, for me, the most important election of my entire lifetime. I've been proud to be a U.S. Senator and Attorney General for my state, the first Latino ever elected in Colorado in those positions, but also very proud to have been a part of the Obama-Biden team as Secretary of the Interior and dealing with the issues and challenges of our time. Unfortunately, we're in a position now where we have to take the White House back and take the U.S. Senate back so we can start getting the course of history back on the right course of history, and that's to be an inclusive America that respects everybody, no matter what their background is. I'm proud to have been one of the early supporters of Vice President Biden. I've known him as a U.S. Senator as well as a fellow member of the cabinet in the Obama-Biden years. But our specific role here for Hilda Solis and Eric Garcetti and so many others who are involved in trying to organize our country and the Latino community is to make sure that we're organizing in every one of the states. Politics is local. And so what we're doing is setting up state Latino, Latina, Latinx councils all across the country. And I implore all of you who are on this call, the several thousand of you, to participate in what will happen in the next 70 plus days as we get to the election with these Latino caucuses. We have set them up in Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Wisconsin, New Mexico. We're working hard on Michigan, Ohio, and Minnesota. And even in states that are not battleground states or not in the question, we are organizing in New York and Rhode Island and in California and other places where we expect to win. But the voice of the Latino community and our 32 million Latino voters, our 62 million Latino in our population, has to be heard this time around. So I would encourage all of you to participate in some of this. I'll give you the example of Arizona. Congressman Ruben Gallego, along with the great mayor of the city of Tucson, Esther Romero, along with Raul Grijalva, are organizing Arizona in a way where, for the first time in recent times, we will be able to have Joe Biden, Kamala Harris take all the electoral votes within the state of Arizona. We got to do it in Texas. We have to do it in all of the other states all around the country. So finally, the sleeping giant of the Latino vote will awaken, and the electoral map will be different as we, on this November 3rd, make sure that we take Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House. So thank you all for participating in this. It is my honor to introduce Eric Garcetti. Eric is the 43rd mayor of the city of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. He's done a tremendous job there while he was on city council and now as mayor for the last 5 years. I remember working hard with him back in the days when we were campaigning to get Hillary Clinton elected against Donald Trump. We didn't quite make it there, but he didn't give up. None of us have given up. In fact, I think we are more inspired and ready to fight this out to make sure that we get rid of Donald Trump and that we put in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, because that Latino agenda that he helped craft along with many of you is the North Star of what we got to accomplish. It's the future of the Latino community. As Joe Biden would say, 1 in 5 Americans are Latino. 25% of Latinos, 25% of school-age children are all Latino. So the future is really in our hands. And it is people like Eric Garcetti who are making that happen. He is one of our national co-chairs, a proud Latino, and someone who's contributing to our agenda. So in a few minutes, we'll hear from our spotlight speaker, the chairman, the mayor, Eric Garcetti. Mil gracias. Tanto.
Gracias y buenos días. Thank you so much, Ken, my brother, my inspiration, and one of the great mentors and models for our community, and co-chair of Todos con Biden. together with Hilda Solis, your partner, who was able to do the nomination on the beach in California. After watching Rhode Island with its plate of calamari, we should have had a plate of tamales. But I'm so inspired by the work she and you have done to push forward a Latino voice inside this campaign, and more importantly, to bring this campaign
Como demócratas, ¿por qué luchamos? Por los trabajadores, por los dreamers, por aquellos solicitando asilo, por las madres, los padres, los hijos y las hijas, por aquellos con discapacidades, por los mayores de edad, por cobertura médica, por el planeta, por nuestros cuerpos, por la igualdad, por el amor, por la educación, por la seguridad de nuestras escuelas, vecindarios y comunidades, por una jubilación con seguridad, por oportunidades, por un salario justo, por los veteranos y las familias Gold Star, por los olvidados, por nuestros principios, por la verdad, por el progreso, por nuestra democracia, por nuestro país, por nuestro futuro. Nosotros somos el partido de la gente. Nosotros somos demócratas.
Hola. This video makes me so proud to be a Democrat. Somos demócratas. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you for tuning in. We are thrilled and grateful to have you join us on day one of the Democratic National Committee Convention. We have a jam-packed schedule, so let's begin with a salute by one of our nation's veteran leaders. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be recited by Lawrence Romo from San Antonio, Texas, a U.S. Air